greatest gift. James 1:17 tells us, every good thing bestowed and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shifting shadow. The first thing that we have to consider in answering this question is that the gift requires at least two beings, a giver and a recipient. With that in mind, the answer to the question, what is the greatest gift, depends on who is answering the question. For the sake of this piece, generally, let us consider that God is the giver and we humans, individually or as a group, are the receivers. So, what are some of the gifts coming from God that we can include in our consideration of which is the greatest? I think that an appropriate place to start from our perspective would be the gift of being alive. Not necessarily that we've been spared all the things that could have taken our life, as much as recognizing that life itself, that is being born, is a gift. Keeping in mind that we are not our physical body, but the God-created spiritual being, which He placed in our mother's womb at the time of our physical conception. Those who have achieved a measure of material success can count their possessions as a gift from Him as well. Deuteronomy 8:18 tells us, "You shall remember the Lord your God, for it is He who is giving you power to make wealth." From God's perspective, His coming to earth in human form to live among us and then to die on the cross for us would seem the ultimate gift to mankind. For many, this last one is considered the greatest gift from the recipient's perspective as well. As great as it may be, I would like to suggest that the greatest gift predates that event by about 4,000 years, coinciding with the creation of the first humans, Adam and Eve. In addition to giving them life and a perfect environment in the Garden of Eden, He chose to give them, and all of their descendants, humans, the power to make our own destiny by giving us free will. And not only the ability to make life decisions, but to experience the consequences of our decisions, whether they be for better or worse. Those of you who have children know that we are born with free will. Despite the consequences, even toddlers can choose to cooperate or not. The fact that they do what they're told under the threat of physical punishment, it's still their choice. I believe, if nothing else, we always have the power to make the choices that determine the course of our lives. The present we live in is the result of the decisions we made when our past was our present, and this present was our future. Granted that sometimes the options we have to choose from may be very limited, and of those we have available to choose from, not all are necessarily desirable or beneficial. However, this reality does not negate our ability to choose. Your money or your life, says the man holding a gun to my head. Although neither alternative is particularly appealing, the reality is that I still have options to choose from. Sometimes this is how our lives may appear. In such situations, we must evaluate the options and do our best to choose the most advantageous choice among the options available to us. Another factor to consider is that we don't always fully consider the outcomes, the consequences of our decisions before we are making them. And consequently, we may have difficulty seeing the relationship between our present reality and our past choices. We always retain the choice to not make a choice, in which case we allow ourselves to assume the role of the victim. However, in such cases, it would be unreasonable to expect our situations would change for our benefit, although that is always a possibility. Many think of God as the deliverer of rewards for following His rules, or the deliverer of punishment for failing to follow His rules. However, I see another possibility. It is we ourselves who deliver the results we get by the choices we make in the exercise of our free will. I don't believe God is into punishment and rewards as much as He simply allows us, for better or worse, to experience the consequences of our free will decisions. It is those consequences that we see as being rewards if they are beneficial to us or desirable, or punishment if they are detrimental to us or adverse to our desires. Although God in His Word sometimes lets it appear that He is taking the credit as a distributor of rewards and punishment, I believe ultimately, since the reward or punishment is inherent in the consequences that result from our choices, it is our choices that will determine whether we experience the resulting consequence as a reward or punishment. Granted, since the consequences flow naturally from the choices, and of necessity the consequences are consistent with the operation of the universe, and the principles that govern the operation of the universe were established by God, so in a way, He is responsible for the consequences, but they're not specific to an individual, but are universally embedded in the choices themselves. Those things we are instructed to do, to choose, or to not do, not to choose, contain the result we will get from doing, choosing, or not doing, not choosing them. God doesn't have to specifically pick on an individual for the choice they make, because the outcome they get is going to result from their particular choice. He advises us to do or forego certain actions because, based on the principles He has established, consistent with His desire that we all have a satisfying and fulfilling life, and if we pay attention to and make decisions consistent with what He has told us, those things will just naturally result in the beneficial and desirable life that not only we desire, but that He desires for us as well. Here is an example from Genesis. Adam and Eve were not expelled from the Garden of Eden as punishment for not obeying God's injunction not to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Although the outcome of their banishment certainly was detrimental to them and humanity after them, it was simply the consequence of having chosen to eat its fruit, as God states in Genesis 3:22 and 24 through 24. Then the Lord God said, "Behold, the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil. And now, lest he stretch out his hand and take also from the tree of life and eat and live forever, therefore the Lord God sent him out from the Garden of Eden to cultivate the ground from which he was taken. So He drove the man out, and at the east of the Garden of Eden He stationed the cherubim and the flaming sword which turned every direction to guard the way to the tree of life." Although Adam and Eve didn't realize it at the time they made their choice, because the tree of life was also in the garden, eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil would preclude them from remaining in the garden. In other words, remaining in proximity to the tree of life, which God knew if they ate from would have seriously detrimental consequences for Adam and Eve. So by choosing as they did to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, God felt He had to remove from Adam and Eve the ability to choose to eat from the tree of life. So in effect, they were unknowingly disqualifying themselves from being able to remain in the garden. Paul tells us in 1 Corinthians 10:23, "All things are lawful, but not all things are profitable. All things are lawful, but not all things edify," is the New American Standard, which says to me that God did not establish the laws and the commandments as a basis for judging or rewarding or punishing us, but rather for our guidance in making wise choices. And here's something else to consider. John, in his first letter, 1 John 4:16, tells us, God is love. And in 4:18 he tells us There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, because fear involves punishment. I would assume since God is perfect, his love would also be perfect. If God's perfect love casts out fear with association to punishment, that would seem to reinforce my belief that God does not desire to punish us, and as mentioned, doesn't really have to bother since we'll do it to ourselves through the consequences of the choices we make in life. Since God has gifted humans with the ability to make free will choices, the suffering we experience can sometimes simply be the consequence of the choices we have made, that He, in honoring the gift He gave to us to make choices, allows us to experience. This does not take away from the opportunities suffering may provide to help us grow into the person He intended us to be when He created each of us, or to discover the depths of who He really is. So that's what I see as the greatest gift, and well, something to think about, right? Okay.